Welcome to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito, the show that explores how to build up or break down any relationship with confidence, clarity, and compassion. So financial literacy, we know it matters, and that need for financial literacy can certainly intensify heartache, and it can encourage hope. All too often in so many marriages, one party is the financially literate partner and the other one relies upon that. I see it all the time in the work I do. And when a marriage falls apart, that party without the understanding of the finances is often confronted not only with dealing with the heartbreak of ending a marriage, but they're plummeted into despair because they're just lost financially and terrified. My guest today is Neale Godfrey. Neale has always had a passion to encourage intergenerational money conversations, starting at birth and carrying a family throughout all challenges of life. She's written extensively about the topic of money, and in fact, she's a 28-time author, including the New York Times bestseller, Money Doesn't Grow on Trees, A Parent's Guide to Raising Financially Responsible Children. Neale began her journey in 1972. She was one of the first female executives at the Chase Manhattan Bank, and she went on to become president of the first women's bank. She's a renowned keynote speaker. She teaches at Columbia University Graduate School of Business. She's appeared on numerous television shows, including Oprah Winfrey, Good Morning America, Today, and others. But recently, Neale has turned her focus, dare I say, motivated by her own personal journey, the gray divorce. So let's start with why this topic. Why is the gray divorce getting your attention? What happened in your life that made you focus on this?
Well, Pat, it is fabulous to be here. And you know I'm a fan, and you are the one who walked me through my gray divorce and made it a seamless process. And so I am eternally grateful. Gray divorce is really important. This is something that I've been married 3 times. I've been divorced 3 times, and 2 of them were gray divorces. So I am in the wheelhouse of, wow, take a step back. What do women need? And can I help them through this process?
But your gray divorce, interestingly, wasn't the, as you call it, the pass the butter syndrome. Your gray divorces, and you opened up the topic, were a little bit different.
I get the most unique way that my husband told me he wanted a divorce. We had a wonderful birthday celebration for me. He took me to Per Se, a restaurant, a fancy dancy in New York City, kissed me, told me he loved me, put me on an airplane for me to ride, to go to Spain to horseback ride. And when I arrived, there was a text, and the text said, "This isn't working." And of course, I got back and said, "What, sweetheart? What's not working?"
You thought he meant like the toaster or the oven or something else.
You know,
you didn't think he meant the marriage.
No, I didn't think that he meant the big enchilada.
This was not the situation where you're married 40 years, you got nothing left, no more romance, no more fun. This was not that kind of situation. So gray divorces come in all kinds of shapes and sizes.
I like that. They come in all shades of gray.
That's a good one. Well, it's interesting, Neale. You and I have talked about this, and the Wall Street Journal reports that the divorce rate has been lowering, except and unless if you're 55 or older.
Yep. And that's the whole point with gray divorce. Gray divorce is the one that you are 55 and older, and women, more than men, wake up and decide, hey, I have another 40 years to live. I can be self-actualized. I don't have to sit across the table from somebody who actually doesn't know me. The kids are gone. The dog is dead. I can live. I do not have to suck it up.
I'm over 65. So are you, if I can share. We don't care what people think when we make these decisions anymore.
No. I'm entitled to a freaking life. And you know what? I'm going to have it. His thing was, which finally came out, it was about his kids and it was about money.
And that's the second and third marriage problem with gray divorce.
I missed that memo.
So Neale, the other statistic that you shared with me that was fascinating to me, every 13 seconds, there's a divorce in America. Okay. That's about 2.4 million divorces a year. And I can say, I think the pandemic has had a lot to do with divorces and the number of them. And we'll talk about that in a minute. About 50% of marriages in the U.S. will end in divorce. 67% of first marriages terminate. But The shocking news is 73% of third marriages will end in divorce. And that means if you're in your third marriage, chances are it's a gray one. Does that surprise you, Neale?
The truth is, it doesn't. I think what surprises me is that women are coming into their own and they're secure enough to say, I want a life and I deserve it and I'm going to go get it. And I'm jumping off the cliff.
Do you think that's unique to women or women and men?
No, men tend to do I'm going to go get living jewelry. I'm buying the Porsche and I'm also getting the little hot one. And it doesn't matter that we can't talk to each other. She can be arm candy. So we see, and we've always seen that trend with men. I don't think that's changing. Men are more willing to stay in that marriage as long as they have sort of, shall I say, something outside the marriage to keep them busy. Women are more interested in a relationship as opposed to sex or arm candy. We don't respond to arm candy. In fact, it kind of embarrasses us in most cases.
I think that there's, something to be said about that. But I also think that both men and women, particularly during the pandemic, got to the breaking point. There have been reports that the pandemic strained many, many marriages, and there were many breaks as a result. And I'm wondering how the pandemic impacted the gray divorce. Couples married a long time, couples married a short time, people of a certain age. What are your thoughts about that?
We don't know the statistics yet. I mean, it's new and it's just coming out now. During the pandemic, it exacerbated everything. I mean, you're sitting there 24/7 looking at the same person going, oh my God. Now, it was worse though, Pat, on the ones that had little kids and had to, do Zooming with the children and the children aren't behaving. And then you're trying to, if you're a white collar worker and you're sitting at home and trying to do that. And how do I get the stuff delivered? And oh my God, my elderly mother or father or someone else got sick. And the women were called on to be the caregivers. They were the true sandwich generation.
So when the pandemic hit, I remember very specifically thinking, well, it's been a good run. I guess things will slow down in at least my area of practice. Shockingly, within 2 months of the pandemic hitting in March of 2020, we have been busier, at least in our divorce practice, than ever. Now, apparently, divorce is on the uprise for gray divorces, but apparently also online self-divorce agreements rose by 34% in 2021. So the reality is that people decided, much like after 9/11, and I remember this specifically, I don't want to live like this anymore. So divorces rose during the pandemic because people just decided, I might die. I don't know how much more time I have. I want to enjoy my life. And it was a shocking thing to see. I think with regard to the people that were home with younger children, they couldn't make a decision to leave. There was too many distractions. But I think people without children, older people, just decided, I want to be happy. And I think that was a very significant finding. So before you think about getting divorced, and by the way, what age is the gray divorce? What is that? What is the gray divorce?
Basically they're saying age 50 and above. I've seen some statistics that say 40 and above because you're in a different generation, but it's the same thing. I like 50 and above, and it's quote unquote later in life. The kids are out, the kids are on their own trajectory. And you're sitting there going, really? This is my life?
If you're thinking about getting divorced and you're older, what are the money marriage myths that you need to be aware of? What do you need to know so that your children don't have to pick up the baggage? And how can you build your financial security? Those are a lot of questions, I know, but I'm wondering if you could give us some insight on that, since your area of expertise is finances.
That's my whole thing, is to make sure that the women are secure. The first thing is come clean with yourself. Where are you economically? What savings do you have? What investments do you have? What's going on with the finances? Unfortunately, in a long-term marriage, everything is commingled. So you have to sit there and really know what you both have, what it looks like, and then you have to really design, what life do you want? You want to stay in that family home? You want to move and downsize? You want to move and live near the kids? Really decide what you want.
That's while you're thinking about the divorce. And I see people come to me all the time, older people married a long time or not, and they really have no idea what life's going to look like if the marriage ends. So there is a planning phase that somebody has to enter into before they share the news with their mate. How does one build financial security while they're in a miserable end of a marriage? What do you do? What are the tools?
The problem is without tipping your hand, which is really hard. It's really hard to say, oh, gee, I'm going to get my own checking account. Oh, gee, I'm going to get my own assets. You know that, Pat, as an attorney. And frankly, I think the first call that they make, if they're thinking about a divorce, is to call you and to make sure that let's go through what I need to know. But if you're going to do this on your own and think about it, you need to think about what there is. And here's the bad news. In a lot of marriages, and we know in a lot of long-term marriages, women have said, you know what? He's going to handle the money part. He's going to be in charge of the investments. The further away you are from the financial life that you both have, the harder it's going to be. It doesn't mean it's insurmountable. It means you just have more work to do.
It is usually one party, probably the man, but one party usually takes care of the finances. And it is unusual that the other party asks for details all the time. I mean, I have clients who come in, they don't even know who their accountant is who filled out their tax returns, which certainly gives us a lot of information. By getting together and preparing, you always say you got to put together your team. What do you mean by that?
You need frankly, you need your kids. They're part of the team and friends. You need your lawyer, your accountant. If you have a bookkeeper, you need to have team you that you put together to make sure that you're answering all these questions. It can be easy or it can be messy, because when you do say that you want a divorce, sometimes, and Pat, you know better than anyone, a lot of times the other spouse does not respond well to that.
No, and all too often people don't have the information gathered. And the more information you have gathered, quite frankly, the more cost effective it is to deal with your lawyer. Because if your lawyer has to gather all the information, it's an expensive process. So I tell people during initial meetings, get as much information as you can together so we can make an intelligent analysis. So when you say put your team together, team you, Neale, are you talking about just your financial team? Because I think there's an emotional team that has to be put together also. It's a lot to go through change at any age. Over 60, 65, it's a real lot to go through change.
100%. What you need is your emotional team. Your emotional team should be your intimate friends. You need two types of friends in this. The ones that are going to also say to you, hold it, deep breath. Let's talk about how you can redo some of the stuff that's in the marriage to make it more palatable. Because the big question is, do you love him? Do you want to wake up every day and see his face? If the answer is no, then you know it's time for divorce. You also need the friends who are going to say, okay, hold it, hold it, hold it. Let's design that life. Let's make sure that you know all the things in your life.
When we talk about making the decision, whether or not you end the marriage at a later age, I think there's a different thought process in a second or third marriage than in the please pass the butter syndrome in a long-term marriage. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I think that when somebody's been married a really long time and they look over and they're bored out of their mind, what somebody has to think about is my history with this person enough to keep me in this marriage? Because sometimes it is. Sometimes that history is enough comfort, financial comfort, emotional comfort to make the decision to stay. You know, marriages ebb and flow. I say it regularly. You have to fall in love with your spouse 1,000 times during a marriage. One of the things I'm cautious about when somebody comes to me in a long-term marriage is, are you bored? Are you just sexually attracted to somebody else? Or do you really want to end this marriage? And that's something you have to think about, because your financial life changes. It's unusual that it doesn't, regardless of your financial circumstances. So in that putting your team together, I think you really need to think about, do I really want it? Is the benefit going to outweigh the heartache?
I love that, Pat. One of the things that I loved when I first met you was for you to sit there and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Is there a possibility this can be repaired? Is there stuff that can happen in the marriage? Do you need to dress in sexy underwear? I mean, what's really going on?
Did I really say that? I might have. I don't know.
You might have. I think you asked me if I shaved my legs or not. But,
Well, because we became friends right away because we had so much in common. Right. I promise all my clients I won't ask that. But I was concerned. You were of a certain age. It was your third marriage. And there were financial consequences, no matter how independent you are.
Those are the types of things and that supports, structure that you have to put together. That team you need to put people together who are going, hold it. You love this guy. You take care of this guy. This is part of your identity. What are you doing? Go find a hobby. Go take Pilates. Go do something else that's going to fill your soul that may not be here. You've just been looking at him day after day. And the fact of the matter is you're both retired and it's too much time. Or is it really a fundamental, we are not connected. We are not soulmates. I would rather do this on my own, regardless of the consequences. Those are the types of emotional things that you have to think about. And frankly, I'm a believer of timeout. Take a timeout. Do not talk to each other for a couple of months. See what that feels like. Go get an Airbnb. Go move in with the kids. Go move in with a friend. What does it feel like not having him part of your support structure? And frankly, he may never have been part of your support structure. Those are all issues you have to look at.
So I got divorced in my 50s, and I have to say my analysis was pretty simple. I literally said, would I rather be alone than live with this person for the rest of my life? Fortunately or unfortunately, the decision is I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than live with this person. Not because he was bad and I was good, but because it was just not a connected marriage. So I think there's a lot of thought processes that you have to go through before you make that decision, particularly around older age, because, there's no guarantees that anything's out there waiting for you. And if you're not a motivated person where you're going to find hobbies and have friends, it could be a little bit lonely. So far what we know, Neale, is that if you are considering a great divorce, you need to get it together and think it through before you share it with your partner. You need to understand your finances. You need to understand how to build financial security. You need to put your team together, get your act together. But when you are actually pulling the trigger and you're knee deep in your divorce, what do?
I'm a person who thinks it's really important to make sure that you both can be civil with each other, because if not, then the fighting begins. My divorce was kind of unique in that after the initial texts, well, actually during the entire divorce, as Pat knows, he never would have a conversation with me. He wouldn't meet with me. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't get on the phone with me. He would only do text and email, and it was moved into his lawyers right away.
Which made it very painful for you, let's be honest. Also, that lack of communication is probably why it wasn't a good marriage. Another conversation for another day. Had you not been financially familiar or financially sophisticated, it could have been devastating, not just emotionally, but financially.
No question about it. And I was gobsmacked, as they say, and I had no idea. None of it made any sense. And then when he said the kids, it was like, you're kidding, and all this was done in text. So it was very final very quickly in that he had already spoken to lawyers. He had already gotten everything all arranged. The prenup was going to be the postnup. I mean, it was like, oh my God, the train had left the station.
So what did you do before and during that made it okay for you financially? Emotionally, it's devastating, again, especially at a certain age. But what did you do, and what could you tell our listeners to do that made it so that you financially thrived after the divorce?
Well, basically, the way he came in with more assets than I had, albeit I am my own person financially, there was a prenup, and it was pretty simple. It was what's his is his, mine is mine. And that made sense. And that's what it should be. But you do need, if you come into a later marriage or if you have a disparity in assets going into a first marriage, you do need a prenup. And that's a painful thing because for a woman, it says to us, oh my God, I'm telling him I don't trust him. No, it's the business side of marriage. Men do not have a problem with a prenup because for them, it's a business arrangement. And what I say to women is, Pat, would you go into a business deal with someone you don't trust? No, of course I would trust them. Would you go into that same business deal without getting a legal agreement? No, of course not. That's what a prenup is.
We did an episode on prenuptial agreements, but in this episode, I want to target on the later marriage because later marriages do end with more frequency than younger marriages. And a prenup in a later marriage is, in my opinion, essential. It saves time, it saves emotion, it saves you financially. Had you not had that, imagine the extraordinary financial uncertainty or the time this would have taken to be completed. So really in a later marriage, the problem though is when you have the 40-year marriage, please pass the butter syndrome end of the marriage, and you are so intertwined financially that ending the marriage is devastating. And how do you avoid being the bad lady or the bad guy syndrome? How do you avoid that fear, even if it's not a financial reality?
Well, within the prenup, the whole concept is that I love you, I want to take care of you. So whoever predeceases, I mean, you want to get that out on the table in the beginning, because if you don't agree that I love you and I want to make sure that for the rest of your life you're taken care of, when you're not there anymore, the assets would revert back into whose ever family owned them. So in my case, it was you get to stay in the apartment that is his, that we decided we would live in his apartment. I would be taken care of and it would be covered until he actually died. And then when I die, it would just go back to his kids. My prenup had a few little glitches in it, but I was willing to put up with that. It was fine. And I was also signed on to the fact that I was going to take care of him, not only emotionally, but also medically, etc., for the rest of his life. I signed on to that and I knew that. And he has major health issues.
In a marriage, again, when you get married later, there's a prenup that could address the issue of the end of a marriage through divorce or death. But in these long-term marriages, there are rarely, if ever, a prenuptial agreement. And those are the ones, I think, that leave people just with their head spinning, because it's not just you, but you don't want to burden your children. You don't want to pass the financial baggage on to your children. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're okay so your kids don't have to worry about taking care of you?
One of the things that you need to think about is long-term health care insurance. It's a whole lot cheaper when you buy it when you're young than when you buy it when you're older. But as part of the divorce settlement, I am a stickler on making sure you have that. It's just what you said with Pat, that we are much more likely to become disabled than we are to drop dead. So it's that period of time that you don't want to be a burden to the kids. You don't want to go into a nursing home. You want something provided for, and you need to have the talks. You need to have the talk with
who?
Well, first, if you're still married and you decide you stay together, you have to have that with your spouse. And more importantly, you also have to have that with your kids. Let's talk about what that's going to look like. If something happens later in life, do you guys want me to move in? Do I want to move in with you? And if so, do we need to reconfigure your home? Am I going to live in a nursing home? Some women say, yeah. I've got a friend who's in a nursing home now. She's like, I don't think she's thrilled, but she's okay with it, who did not have long-term health care insurance. So those are the conversations, but have them now while you're walking around and you're still healthy and you haven't had, God forbid, that stroke or something that's debilitating.
I've had a situation where I've represented people in a second marriage where one spouse gets dementia or Alzheimer's. So here you are married 10 years, you're 75 years old. I have the situation, and the spouse begins to suffer from dementia. When you're married to somebody for 40 years, I think it's a little different to take care of them. If you're married for 10 years and they have dementia, you are really in a difficult spot. So getting divorced from somebody who begins to suffer mentally is a very complex issue. And if you haven't thought that through, such as, are your children going to step in and be your guardian? What is my financial exposure, regardless of a prenuptial agreement, if you have to go into a home? Those are really tough conversations. It's naive not to have them if you get married later. It's also naive not to have them as your marriage ages out, because sometimes one person is in assisted living and the other isn't, and the other person wants to have a life with somebody else. That's not uncommon.
Absolutely. And we were talking before about the team you that you're putting together. In fact, my team me, my financial advisors, Mitch and Ann, sat me down with Pat and basically said, okay, let's go through. These are the things in the prenup that you absolutely need, non-negotiable. One of them was long-term health care, because they wanted to make sure that I was being protected. And when you do team you need the Mitches and the Anns and the Pats of the world who are looking at team you. I've been involved as kind of coaching with other people, with other women who are going through divorces. And one of them, and I didn't tell Pat about this one, but they were very, very wealthy, famous family. And he found, the 25-year-old exotic dancer that he felt after a long-term marriage, and they were in their 50s, that, he wanted a life and new children and new family. And we went to talk to lawyers. And one of the lawyers, immediately when we walked in, he basically told her the fee would be 1% of all the assets that were coming in to.
Not ethical, at least here in New Jersey.
This was in Florida. And he had flown in on his private jet. He had a professional tan. It was the middle of the winter. And I sat there and I literally pulled her out of the room. And I said, you are not going to use a lawyer who flew in on his private plane, who sat there and told you that he's going to get 1% of the assets. And now let's talk. It was like, we're out of here. And she was so upset about what was going on that she couldn't even focus.
So if you're in a long-term marriage and you haven't been exposed to the legal world, and most people haven't been, that is a problem. People don't know where to go, who to hire, and who to trust. And my advice is use your gut. Use your instincts. If you don't feel that you could relate to that practice or that person, go somewhere else.
My grandma Jewel would say, I did a financial radio show and we would have Grandma Jewel on to give financial tips. She was 95 years old and it was fantastic. She knew nothing about money. It didn't matter. People would come on and ask Grandma Jewel questions. How do you pick a financial advisor? And Grandma said, the same way I pick a hairdresser or a dry cleaner. I ask my friends, I find out who's good. If the stuff comes out without spots, if my hair doesn't come out green, that's the one I go with. I go in, I try them once, I talk to them. If I'm happy, I stay. If not, I'm gone. That's the same way. That's it. Financial tips from Grandma Jewel.
Yeah, it really isn't that complex. I mean, reputation matters, certainly credentials matter, but comfort level matters, relatable matters, because this is not, you need somebody not only to have financial acumen, but somebody in a team to understand who you are, what the reality of your financial future looks like. So when you envisioned, or when you see people in the gray divorce envision their financial future, how does that look? How do you help them do that, Neale?
Like we said before, identify your assets. What's there? You're going to have to sit down and he's going to have to disclose, and you are. You're going to have to list your debt, all of your debt. And remember, there's all this little hidden debt. Oh, you lent the kids some money. Oh, you lent this aunt money. List all of that. You have to decide also what's marital and what's separate. And Pat will help you go through that with the accountant.
The advantage, by the way, of a prenuptial agreement, again, we're talking about a later in life marriage, is that the very existence of a prenuptial agreement, or the drafting of a prenuptial agreement, requires that you disclose all of your debt and assets. So you go in with complete knowledge, as opposed to the 40-year marriage where sometimes one party or the other doesn't know what the other one's doing financially, and they're in shock. So you wake up, you're 70 years old, you're ending a marriage of 40 years, and you realize, oh my God, he or she made all these bad investments. Can I really afford to end this marriage? That's where it gets really painful. Or sometimes it's the other way. I didn't realize we had all of this. I would have ended the marriage 10 years ago if I knew we were this financially sound. So really familiarizing yourself with the finances, going to the financial planners meetings, looking at the tax returns is critical to you making a decision. You may make a decision to stay if you can't afford to live. Or if you're in a much better financial situation than you thought you were, you may make the decision to leave earlier.
And then you as Pat is saying, then you have to decide, how does it get divvied up? And you have to look at things that you may not have thought about. What inheritances are going to come in? What's Social Security going to look like? She may have been home and not working. His Social Security is more or going to be more. What does life insurance look like? Again, what does long-term health care look like? What do the investments look like?
You raise an interesting point. And I've also had this situation in a marriage of 45 years. We knew the husband wasn't in the best of health. We bargained for the life insurance to remain in full force and effect, even though there was no legal basis to do that. But she took that as an asset, even though it literally wasn't, because he was still alive. And sure enough, he died. So she got far more than she would have had we negotiated it without the life insurance. So you have to make sometimes decisions based upon things that aren't crystal clear.
And also on the life insurance, which is really important. If there's going to be a life insurance policy that is continuing and you are quote unquote counting on him to pay the premium, you must be the owner of the policy, including being beneficiary. Only the owner of the policy can actually change the name of the beneficiary. And you don't want to find out later in life that, number one, the premiums were not paid, or worse yet, number two, that the beneficiary, meaning you, that name was changed.
You raise a really good point. We have an estate and trust department here. We represent many people in litigation where there was an obligation to maintain life insurance and it wasn't done. Then you're involved in a very complex, expensive lawsuit as to whether or not that change should have been made a beneficiary. If you are unable to have the ownership of the policy changed to you, at the very least, please make sure you build into your final agreement that the agreement itself operates as authorization to get information from the life insurance company on a regular basis. And in fact, perhaps have the spouse sign an authorization so that at the very least you could be advised anytime there's a change or a premium isn't made. Because without that information, it is not uncommon for someone to change the beneficiary, and that litigation is expensive and long, and you don't want to do that. So that's a great point.
And that's really important. The other thing I want you to look at, pension plans and retirement accounts. Take a look at that. Are they joint? Is your name on them? You don't want to all of a sudden find out that you're not entitled to that money. And there are two ways to look at money. Number one, the assets and the debt that are there, but also the income that's going to be coming in. And sometimes you're working. I mean, I'm, way older and I'm still working. I'm going to be working forever. So I have an income, and you need to take a look at that. And how is your income going to be structured moving forward? What Social Security, what pension plans, what ongoing, interest or income are you going to get from whatever those investments are? And you need to sit down and know very, very clearly what you're going to get and what you're not going to get. You cannot design your financial life in the dark.
With regard to retirement funds, the law permits us through a process called the Qualified Domestic Relation Order to take an account of 401k and divide it however one agrees to. Say it's 50-50, roll it to the other person so there's no penalties and tax consequences. I see people who try to negotiate this on their own and they liquidate the 401k, ending up with a penalty and tax consequence, and then give the spouse the money. The ideal way to do it is under the Qualified Domestic Relations Order, which doesn't result in a penalty or doesn't result in a tax consequence, and basically creates two separate funds. The same thing with a pension, a payout pension, a defined benefit plan. If you structure it correctly, you could end up with a cash flow and an income that is without penalty or without additional tax ramifications. Very important to think about. Just like when you take Social Security. I don't know about you, but most people don't realize you can go on socialsecurity.gov or .com or whatever it is and figure out what your Social Security benefit will be at various ages. Understanding that if you take it before full retirement age, you are restricted as to what you can earn. So that's another factor that people who are older getting divorced, whether or not in a long-term or short-term marriage, must be aware of, so you can calculate what your income will be.
Well, and I also like the point that you brought up too about the tax consequences. For instance, Social Security is taxable. So you have to look at those things when you are planning and putting together your financial scenario moving forward. You have to look at this on an after-tax basis because that's what you're paying everything with. And even though as you get older, you're in a lower tax bracket, it's not that much lower. You really have to look at that because all of a sudden, whoa, my net is only this. Yeah, your net is only that.
The other thing, Neale, is that my experiences with people over a certain age, you do spend a little bit less as you get older. Children are generally educated. The big ticket items are over. You spend a little less and you spend differently. And there's just so many years where you just be at peak spending. So you need to understand that going forward. I might not need in 10 years what I need today. That's got to be part of your vision and your financial future.
Yes, but I would also caution you against that because
why is that?
Number one, you're going to live longer than anyone thought you were going to live, which is wonderful. You may need health care that you didn't count on, which is not good. You also, there is the cost of living increase that creeps up. And yes, Social Security bumped up this year, but it doesn't really keep up with what's going on. And the other thing is there's a phenomena happening with our generation of baby boomers. We are leaving money and helping out with the grandchildren where it didn't necessarily happen before. College is incredibly expensive. We, our generation, is taking on some of that college burden and some of those expense burdens off our own children for their children. And now all of a sudden, you are going to be burdened with something that you didn't think you were going to be burdened with, or that you want to. I want to help the grandkids out. So you're not necessarily going to be spending less. And I hear you, Pat, but I like people to plan the other way. What do you want to do? I want to travel. I want to be with the grandkids. I want to help pay for their college. Whoa.
Well, that goes back to our planning stage when you're in this, I'm thinking about a divorce at a certain age. You may very well want to do those things while you're still married. Maybe you fund your grandchildren's 529 college plans. Maybe you invest in things you want to invest with. So particularly with regard to the 529 plans for your grandchildren, if you're still married and you do that, you're using your joint money to do that. If your marriage is over, you're using your individual money. So that's part of the planning stage. You know, it takes a long time to get to a point where your marriage ends. I suggest that you use that time to plan and be smart about it. Because if you are, you could set yourself up where you could have a really ideal life financially and emotionally after a marriage ends. Which leads me to ask you this question, Neale. It's been how many years since your divorce?
The divorce was fine. I always look at when he left me, and he left me in, I guess, 17.
And how is life looking for you?
Love it. I love my life. After, the emotional thing kind of hangs with you. It remorphs and it becomes part of who you are. But I am grateful. I am happy. I am truly better off because the situation with the kids would have been a train wreck when I was 85 years old. So I think I did get a get out of jail free card. Again, emotionally, that's something that I have conversations with myself. I think that the big thing in divorce is you have to be happy being with you. And I love hanging out with me. I think I'm funny.
Well, you are funny, but was there any shame involved in ending the marriage? One of our prior guests and I talked about that as you get older. Are you embarrassed that you got divorced again? I've learned not to be embarrassed about much, quite frankly, which is why I could have this podcast and talk about anything. But there was a shame factor when my marriage ended. I'm over it. How about with you?
Isn't that interesting? No, my first marriage, yes. I remember my mother, whom I loved and adored, said something that for my first marriage, which was a stab through the heart. And she said, well, of course he left you for another woman. You were more successful and earned more money. So no, with this one, no, I feel no shame. I'm grateful for my life and my kids and my grandkids, and I love every day. No, I am not shamed at all.
So what do the next chapters look like for you personally and professionally?
My whole life has been dedicated to paying it forward. And I want to be able to give the financial advice to the women who are going to be facing gray divorce. So my thing is to come out with a book on gray divorce to empower women of our age to be able to take charge of their life, design the rest of their life that's going to fill and nurture them and be safe financially. So I'm going to come out with a book in probably a year and a half to empower women, to have them know, yes, they can do it, even if they've never looked at anything financial in their entire life. They are not held hostage. You can design this, and I'm going to be there with them every step of the way.
No doubt in my mind. And we look forward, Neale, to hearing more from you about this topic. So I thank you so much for joining us. We'll continue to talk. As you heard today, there's planning involved in the gray divorce. One of the things that I suggest you do is to get your financial information gathered before you move forward. Understand your finances, understand where your money is, understand where your money isn't, understand your debt. That will go a long way in making a conversation with an attorney meaningful. You have to think about things when you're getting divorced, when you're older, or when your marriage ends. What happens if your spouse begins to suffer from dementia or Alzheimer's? Are there documents that should be in place that will protect you, protect your spouse? What happens if you marry somebody who has children from a prior marriage? Who makes the decision about their health? Documents can be executed through your lawyer that could address that, so there's not chaos and confusion in the hospital bed. And I've seen it happen where people are fighting instead of spending time and energy on their loved ones. Get your estate in order, because again, marriages end by divorce or death, and the older you are, the more likely it is by death. If you're marrying somebody who's older and you are divorcing them, what are your financial obligations to take care of them? How about if you're in assisted living together? Who stays? Who goes? What are your arrangements? So there are many legal consequences to a divorce at an older age. And I caution you to be aware of these before you enter into a gray divorce. And just a tip, if you are in a relationship as an older couple, even if you're not going to get divorced, let me suggest that before traveling together, you exchange information, family members' names and phone numbers, itineraries, health information, because stuff happens. So it's good to just make sure information's exchanged, because if somebody ends up in the hospital and you're in Europe, who do you call? Give that some thought. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review so more people can listen in to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito.